Hello everybody, welcome back to Storytime with Rob. I am Rob, and this week we are going to talk about Missing 411. And these are just the stories, different, disappearances. And if you don't know what Missing 411 is, I kind of just said a little bit there, but these are going to be disappearances and inside and around national parks or other areas of large land. Now, this was actually a book series started by David Paulides, who's an investigator. He did a couple books about Bigfoot, and Missing 411 was one of his big things. So a lot of these stories are just normal disappearances, but there's always some weirdness to them. So let's go ahead and do some examples, and hopefully you enjoy. Now, the first story we'll talk about is a man by the name of Maurice Doc Domitz. And this story takes place back in 1981. At this time, Doc was a PhD in theology, so I'm going to refer to him as Doc here. Him and his friend David McSweeney went topaz hunting in Pike National Forest in Colorado. Doc, being 84 years old, wasn't in, particularly good health, so he needed help from McSherry to get to the digging spot. The two drove 16 miles down a dirt road until they reached the spot called Topaz Point. Now, Native Americans claimed that it was haunted by evil spirits. Early settlers called the place the Devil's Head. Once they arrived, they found a spot about 50 yards away. And after about 2 hours of digging at around 3 p.m., McSherry walked over to Domitz to let him know that it was time to drive home, and then he returned to his own pit to clean up the tools and collect the stones. When he returned back to the spot where Domitz was, only about 15 minutes later, he was gone. The McSherry immediately knew that something was going on because, like we said, the doc wasn't in best health. He had really bad knees and couldn't make it up the hill by himself, which is why he needed help. And not only that, but there was also no sign of his tools that he'd been using to dig the holes in the ground. It is as if something had taken him and his tools. McSherry thought that maybe there was some chance that he would have made his way back to the car, so he decided to go back. He waited, nobody was there, honked the horn a few times, no response. Doc was nowhere to be found. The site where he was last seen was not disturbed other than the small pit that he was digging to find topaz. And there was also no signs of struggle in the dirt, no blood was present, and that indicated that he hadn't been attacked by a wild animal. So after this, McSherry flagged down a motorist on the Rampart Range Road. And by around 11 p.m. that night, Douglas County Sheriff had been notified, and the search and rescue teams were at the scene. For the following 5 days, the area was searched thoroughly by grid patterns with no sign of Domitz. The search dogs could not even pick up a scent. He had vanished. On July 18, 1981, Maurice's wife, Myrtle, wrote Governor Richard Lamb asking for further assistance in finding him, saying that she believed that Maurice may have met foul play or been carried out of the area. She requested a more extensive investigation of his disappearance, but nothing was ever discovered, and Maurice was officially declared dead in 1990 after being missing for 9 years. So which brings the question, what happened to him? Like I stated, there was no sign of a struggle, no blood, cries for help, nothing, which suggests he was not abducted or killed by a wild animal, and then his tools went missing with him as well. So perhaps he decided to wander off and relieve himself, or to lose himself in nature. Given his medical condition, he could not have possibly made it far. But given the terrain, he could have easily gotten stuck somewhere or hidden in the case of suicide. He may have wandered off looking for a better dig site, or knowing he was at the end of his life, may have gone off into the forest to spend his final moments in the wilderness. Or maybe Domitz was never in that area that day, and the story was made up by McSherry to cover up his murder or assisted suicide. And if Doc was murdered by his friend David, what would have been the motive? Domitz was a devout Christian and a former pastor, so suicide is a little unlikely. Our next story brings us to Bessie and Glenn Hyde. In 1928, a newly married couple named Bessie and Glenn Hyde wanted to take a boat down the Colorado River, which runs through Grand Canyon National Park. The river was hundreds of miles long, and it would take several days to make the journey. Glenn had been preparing for their honeymoon for a long time. He built his own 20-foot boat that was very safe. He wanted to win prize money for a new speed record to travel down the Colorado River, and if they succeeded, Bessie would go on record as the first woman to ever make the trip. During their journey, they would stop to hike some of the trails. They met a photographer named Emery Kolb who took pictures of them and later gave the photos to the police. When they never arrived at their destination, Glenn's father became very worried. He asked the park rangers to send an airplane over to the river, and they spotted the couple's boat. It was floating upright, with no sign of it ever being overturned. There were supplies still on the boat as well, but the couple was nowhere to be seen. The story of Bessie and Glenn had been told so many times that it's even become sort of a legend, like stories of Bessie's ghost spotted standing in the river. There are multiple theories. One of the theories suggests that Glenn was an abusive husband, whose prolonged exposure to the extreme conditions of the canyon heightened by his nasty behavior. It is speculated by some people that Bessie grew tired of the rough treatment of her new husband, murdered him, hiked out of the canyon to start a new life. Many of Glenn's friends and family members discounted that theory, of course, stating that he was not an abusive person and that he dearly loved Bessie. Another story supports the speculation that Bessie shot and killed Glenn because of his abusive tendencies. Some friends of Georgie Clark, a woman who gained notoriety for her rafting adventures in the Grand Canyon, speculate that she was Bessie Hyde. Conversations about Clark's connections to Bessie started when the friends were pursuing her personal items following her death in 1992. People who had known her for decades have never been invited inside of her home. Upon looking at Clark's personal effects, her friends learned that her birth certificate indicated that her real name was Bessie DeRoss, not Georgie. Clark or Georgie White, which was another surname that she sometimes used. The latter two were the last names of husbands that she had divorced. Her friend's curiosity further piqued when they found the marriage license of Glenn and Bessie Hyde at her home, and a pistol in her lingerie drawer. Colorado River historian Brad Demick, whose book Sunk Without a Sound, The Tragic Colorado River Honeymoon of Glenn and Bessie Hyde, investigates the couple's story and the subsequent theories, looked at the items from Clark's home, and concluded from photographs that Clark and Bessie Hyde were not the same person. And following up on the reports of abuse, in 1971, an elderly woman claimed that she witnessed Glenn abusing Bessie, and Bessie stabbed him and ran away. This woman, however, later recanted her story, saying that she made it up for attention. A few years later, the unidentified body of a man in his 20s was found buried near the cabin of the photographer Emmy Kolb. The man had a bullet in his skull. It was determined that this was not the body of Glenn Hyde, but it has still led some people to believe that since Kolb was one of the last people to see them alive, that he could have murdered them. Stacey Arras. On July 25th, 1981, 14-year-old Stacey Arras was out at an area of Yosemite National Park in California called the Sunrise Meadows, along with her father George and a group of 6 others on an excursion that was to last several days. The group made their way up to a cluster of cabins at the Sunrise High Sierra Camp, which lies about 9,400 feet above sea level, and where they had planned to stay for the night and get some rest before heading on their trip in the morning along a trail called the High Sierra Camp Loop. The camp itself is situated in a picturesque alpine meadow and holds up to 34 people in 9 cabins, and it also features various activities and hiking trails. As soon as they arrived, Stacey changed clothes and went on a short hike along one of these trails, planning to go take photographs of a nearby lake. No one knew that she was about to go hiking off the face of the earth, and that she was about to just seemingly blink out of existence. Now, before leaving, Stacey asked her father if he wanted to join her, but he declined, instead saying that he wanted to relax for a while. She headed off on her own, and considering that this was peak season, there were many other people around there. One of these was a man in his 70s named Gerald Stewart. Stacey told her father that she was going to take a walk where Gerald was sitting at the time, on a boulder just 100 feet away from the cabins. At the time, the weather was good, and the trail she was intended to take was an easy, flat run that only stretched 1.5 miles through non-challenging terrain, so there would have been no indication at all that there was anything to be concerned about. In fact, Stacey was not even changed into hiking boots, instead heading out on her walk in flip-flops. She walked over to Gerald and chatted with him a bit as she took some pictures, before telling the old man that she was going to head off to get water. Gerald offered to go along with her, and the two headed off. At this point, they were still very close to camp, and many of the people staying there clearly saw Stacey and Gerald walking along the trail. At some point, Gerald would sit down to take a breather, with Stacey saying she was going to scout ahead and be right back in a minute. Gerald and several others at the camp, including a camp tour guide, watched Stacey walk behind some trees, and this would be the last time that anyone saw her. When the girl did not come back right away like she said, others staying at the camp decided to go up along the trail and see what she was doing. At this point, there still wasn't any panic, and only a short amount of time had passed, and it was just assumed that she was taking photos, but walking along the way to the lake showed no signs of her. Several runs along the short length of the trail turned up nothing, and they even passed another group of hikers, but they had not seen Stacey. It was as if she evaporated into thin air. At this point, there was more of a sense of urgency, with searchers calling out for Stacey and fanning out into the woods, but the only thing that could be found was a lens cap for her camera eerily sitting in the middle of a nearby meadow right near where she was last seen. After about an hour of searching to no avail, authorities were called in, and a massive search operation was launched, involving 150 people, including 67 Mountain Rescue Association volunteers, using tracker dogs and helicopters scouring the vicinity. They found nothing at all. There were no tracks found, none of her belongings, even the dogs couldn't pick up a scent. It was almost as if she hadn't been there at all. And that's where the case stands today, with theories flying about what might have happened to her. One is that it could have been an animal attack. But if this was the case, you would expect there to be more of a commotion and signs of this occurring, such as blood, torn clothing, tracks, and one would also think that she would have shouted. Another idea is that she got lost, but by all accounts, it was an easy, short hike within the side of the camp. How would she so thoroughly get lost in such a short span of time, so close to camp on such an easy trail. Another idea is that she may have been abducted. But again, who would have been able to spirit her away quickly, quietly, and decisively, and why? Still another idea was that she ran away. But why choose that camp to do it? And why run off wearing nothing but flip-flops? None of it makes sense, and adding to the sinister undercurrent is the fact that the Yosemite Park Service has been very hesitant to provide any information on the case. From here, we're going to switch it up just a little bit and talk about a couple stories of children who've disappeared, and when they came back, had pretty interesting stories to tell. Among all the cases of mysteriously vanished people, some really seem to stand out as particularly odd. In some cases, the disappeared doesn't manage to stay that way, and reappears hours, days, or even months later, often with no clue as to what had happened, or with some very strange tales to tell. This has happened particularly with children, who on many occasions have seemed to vanish into thin air, only to come back with tales that are just phenomenally odd, as they are unexplainable. The oldest report we have here allegedly occurred back in August of 1897, when a 6-year-old girl named Lillian Carney went missing in the U.S. state of Maine, as she was out with her parents picking blueberries. According to the parents, she had vanished right under their noses. A preliminary search of the area would quickly expand to over 200 searchers scouring the area and calling the girl's name, all to no avail. After an extensive search, Lillian was found in the woods in a dazed, trance-like state. When asked what had happened to her, the dazed girl replied that she had been in a place in the forest where the sun had shone the entire time she had been there. This was rather odd, considering that the weather at the time of her disappearance had been partly cloudy, and she'd been enveloped by a thick canopy of trees far from any town. And she'd been missing overnight, for actually around 46 hours. What was this continuous sunlight that she saw, and what significance does it have in Lillian's disappearance? It remains unknown. Another bizarre case happened in 1922 in the wilds near the small village of Orsta, near the southwest of Kolsva in Sweden. Here, 8-year-old Olsten Engström lived with his parents, and one day he was walking home from school as usual, along with a classmate, with the two deciding that they would go to the classmate's house to play with some other kids. When they were done, it was about 3:30 p.m., and Olsten began his walk home. It wasn't too far to his place, and it was something that he had done many times before. It should have not taken long to get home, but he never arrived. When 7:30 came, his family began to get extremely worried, sending Olsten's brother, Gustav, to find him. Gustav spoke with a classmate who told him that the boy had left around 3:30 and should have been home long ago. Gustav would look around the entire route but see no sign of his brother, but when he returned home with the bad news, Olsten was there with his parents, shivering with a strange story to tell. According to Olsten, he had been walking home when he took a detour through a wooded area, and a bizarre series of events began to play out. The boy explained how the forest had suddenly came alive with a myriad wildlife crawling from the trees and bushes to scurry about. And as this happened, the day turned dark, as if there was passing storm clouds, but the sky was still clear. He then noticed a strange, acrid smell permeating the air, and when he looked up again, he saw something very weird indeed. Ostin would explain. I looked up and noticed 3 gray objects hovering silently above me. They were so close I could have thrown a stone at him, but the objects were pulsating as if they were breathing, and I saw 2 dark lines on them. A bit further away, over the woods, another 2 objects were floating. They were bigger and darker than the ones above me. He explained that the next thing he remembers was lying on the road in the dark, a short distance from his home, freezing cold and disoriented. In the sky, a pulsating light was retreating into the night, and everything around him had been deathly silent. He then walked to his house to tell his parents about what had happened, and they thought it was just his wild imagination. Oddly, Gustav said that he had thoroughly searched the road his brother had claimed to have been woken on, but had not seen him anywhere. Of the intervening 4 hours from when he left his friend's house to when he stumbled up to his home, he had no memory. The boy would in later years be interviewed by Swedish ufologists Claes Svahn and Andreas Olsson, and they would get a little more information out of Ostin, who would explain to them. Where was I during those hours? I estimate having been gone around 4.5 hours. I didn't arrive home until 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the evening. I almost got beaten because they were believed that I was lying. They sent me to bed and I was bedridden for 4 days and fewer. Probably I had caught a cold lying in the road. It looked as if the objects were pulsating simultaneously, all 3 of them, just like an octopus functioning. They take in water and move by blowing it out. It looked like the objects used the same technique. They moved in a very elegant way, changed directions, and appeared to steer while pulsating. Where was I? Gustav cycled this way while I was lying there without seeing me. I have pondered on this so many times. So what happened to this boy? Who knows? Moving up into the 1960s, there's a very strange case that I dug up on the Missing 411 Reddit forum, from a witness who claimed this tale was told to him by his father. It supposedly happened in the 1960s in the country of Ethiopia, and revolves around his father when he was just 9 years old. On this day, the father was playing with a friend named Gabriel after school in the fenced-off backyard of the father's house. My dad turns his back for a second, and then looks to the back at his friend, and Gabriel is gone. It's important to note that my dad and Gabriel were from the top 1% of Ethiopia's ruling elite. My dad's father was Minister of Interior of Ethiopia, and Gabriel's father was a 4-star general of Ethiopia. The background Gabriel disappeared from had a 10-foot brick wall and armed with guards patrolling on the outside. A couple of hours pass. His parents, my dad's parents, and guards were searching, but no Gabriel. 48 hours pass. Now there's a nationwide search for this important general's kid. It's on the news. Police are searching door to door, describing him and what he was wearing when he disappeared. He was wearing his private school uniform, white shirt, brown pants. Helicopters even searched the countryside looking for him. Still nothing. A month passes, then 2, then 4. People start losing hope that he would never, ever be found, and think the worst. That was that for months, and no further trace was uncovered until exactly 6 months later, when Gabriel was found in the same fenced-off backyard, wearing the same clothes that he had been when he vanished. The boy seemed dazed and confused, and appeared to only think that a couple hours had passed, rather than a full half of a year. And the poster explains. This is where it starts to get weird. Once they confirmed he was okay, they started asking him where he'd been. He said a couple of nice men took him on a trip. He was in a white room that glowed, and other children were there from different countries. He said that he was surprised at the nice men who looked like white guys that could speak Ethiopian, and he could understand what the other children were saying even though they were not Ethiopian. The white glowing room had no windows, and the doors disappeared into the walls. There were buttons on the walls, and if a kid pushed them, a bed would come out of the wall. He said he was then all of a sudden in a city that was glowing, clean, and cars were flying all around him. He said that people were there, but they looked strange, like us, but different. One nice man was still with him and took him to a tall building where he said that he had to stay for a while, but showed him a room that he could use for entertainment. Gabriel said that he could push a button and the room itself goes places. An open field, the beach. The room itself even flies. He said after a couple hours he was taken back to Ethiopia and appeared to be in the backyard. He thought that he'd only been gone a couple hours total. No one believed him. In Ethiopia being a super religious country, most adults around him thought he had got possessed by the devil. Gabriel was even forced to see a priest to get the evil spirits out of him. My dad still kept contact with him throughout their lives. Gabriel got a doctorate in physics, and I believe works in Holland still. Truly bizarre, to say the least. On the very same forum is another unusual case from a poster called Showmaker27, who has a weird story to tell but is vague on specifics. He only said that he's from a Middle Eastern country and has a story to tell in which he does not want to use any real names or places. The incident supposedly happened in the 1980s. Back in a country I will call Topia, there was a small village. The type of village on which everyone knows everyone. The type of village that everyone is familiar with everyone and everything. There's a boy who I will call X. He was around 12 when this happened. He comes from a typical middle-class family. His father is a nurse and his mother is a housewife. However, this boy is a genius. He was a prodigy, top of his class every year. Teachers were baffled about how smart he was, especially in science and math. I can't stress how smart he was, in everything really. He was one of a kind. Since it's a small village, the school bus parks at specific points. It doesn't go house to house. This means that most kids would have to walk for at least 5 minutes so that they would get to and from their house and the gathering point. One day, X never came back home from school. His family asked his friends and the bus driver, and they said that he was on the bus and he got off at the gathering point, just like he did every day for the past 8 years or so. This means that he went missing during the walk from the point to the house. Authorities were alerted, search parties started, but there was literally no trace of him. 2 weeks passed, and the local authorities gave up. It was a Middle Eastern rural village in the 80s, so don't be surprised. This is where it gets scary and interesting. Nearly 3 weeks later, after X had gone missing, he comes back home. In the exact same time that he usually comes back from school, with the same outfit, same backpack, same everything the day that he went missing. He's surprised about why his family is crying and hugging him because he doesn't have the slightest idea about the fact that he was missing for almost 3 weeks. When asked and questioned, he really doesn't remember a thing. In his mind, it was still the same day that it was 3 weeks ago. Like he hadn't gone missing at all. Needless to say, he was never the same again. His grades dropped massively. He had difficulties understanding everything. He's still alive up to this day, working as a garbage man. He's a decent man, very well-mannered, loved and respected by everyone. but what happened to him remains a mystery. And there we go. That is all I got time for this week, guys. So I will continue this probably next week because there's a lot of stuff on here. Get back into the good missing 411 stuff or any other stories about bizarre disappearances. So if you like it, let me know. If you hate it, don't let me know. Just let me keep doing this. Alright, thank you guys very much. I love ya. And I'll see you next time.